Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth. The cold November air clung to the quiet street as the car rolled to a stop in front of a wide, immaculate suburban home trimmed with wreaths and soft golden lights. Inside, the pregnant wife smoothed her coat over her belly and practiced a calm smile, while her husband squeezed her hand with a politeness that felt rehearsed. Their breath fogged as they stepped out, the house looming warm and welcoming, a picture-perfect promise that didn't quite reach her eyes. From the doorway, the mother-in-law appeared, arms open, smile fixed, greeting them with a voice dipped in sugar and scrutiny. Compliments flowed easily, yet every word carried an edge, every glance a measurement. The entryway smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, comforting and heavy. The mother-in-law took the wife's coat with exaggerated care, fingers lingering just a second too long, her eyes flicking to the rounded stomach with a smile that never softened. She spoke of family traditions, of gratitude and blessings, while correcting small details, guiding steps, controlling the room with effortless authority. Laughter chimed from the living room, but the wife felt out of rhythm, aware of being watched even when backs were turned. As they moved deeper into the house, the wife noticed the precision of everything, the place settings aligned, the kitchen spotless, the hostess hovering close whenever she entered a room. Offers of tea, snacks, and cushions came repeatedly, insistently, until kindness felt like pressure. Her husband chatted, distracted, relieved to be home, missing the subtle tension tightening the air. The wife's unease settled quietly, like a warning she couldn't name. Lingering looks followed her movements, pauses stretched a beat too long, and warmth felt performative, not genuine. Outside, the wind rattled bare branches, but inside, danger wore a smile. It was Thanksgiving, a day meant for gratitude and grace, yet beneath the polished hospitality and glowing lights, something dark waited patiently, hidden among traditions, prepared to turn a celebration into something far more sinister. The illusion held steady, fragile as glass, promising comfort while concealing intent sharp enough to shatter lives without warning today. The pregnancy had softened her body but sharpened her awareness in ways no one around her seemed to notice. To the family, she was the delicate one now, the woman who moved more slowly, who needed extra pillows and careful steps. They spoke to her gently, sometimes dismissively, as if she might break under the weight of a strong opinion. The mother-in-law watched her with a thin smile, often remarking on how young she seemed, how motherhood would surely overwhelm her, how easily another woman could have filled her place if things had gone differently. Their assumptions followed her through every room. She was offered chairs before she asked, plates fixed for her without question, decisions made on her behalf. Conversations shifted when she entered, voices lowering, as if she were too fragile for truth. Even her husband, well-meaning but inattentive, treated her with a careful distance, confusing protection with underestimation. In their eyes, she was temporary, defined by her pregnancy rather than her presence, valued for what she carried more than who she was. Yet beneath her calm exterior lived discipline forged long before she ever imagined becoming a mother. She breathed steadily, measured her movements, and absorbed every detail without effort. She noticed the way people positioned themselves, the tone beneath words, the subtle pauses that revealed more than speech. Her reactions were controlled, her expressions carefully chosen, not from fear but from habit. When sharp comments were thrown her way, she responded with polite composure, never defensive, never flustered. Her eyes lingered where others glanced away, cataloging details automatically. The family mistook her silence for weakness, her stillness for submission. They couldn't see the strength that lived quietly within her, the kind that didn't announce itself. To them, she was fragile and replaceable. In truth, she was alert, resilient, and far more capable than any of them imagined that evening. From the moment she heard about the pregnancy, the mother-in-law felt something inside her harden. It wasn't concern or surprise, but resentment disguised as disappointment. In her mind, her son had been cornered, trapped by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She watched the wife move through her house now, touching furniture that had been polished by generations, and felt an irrational fury at the intrusion. Control had always been her language of love. She chose the schools, the vacations, the friends deemed acceptable. Losing that control over her son felt like betrayal. The wife came from a background she considered lesser, lacking refinement, lacking pedigree, lacking the unspoken rules of belonging. Pregnancy, to her, was not a blessing but a strategy, a way to secure a permanent claim on a life she believed should have remained hers to manage. Envy crept in where she least expected it. The youth, the attention, the future that now revolved around another woman gnawed at her pride. Family gatherings had shifted, traditions rewritten, her authority diluted. She told herself she was protecting her son, protecting the family name, preserving a legacy that had been built carefully and deserved loyalty, not disruption. As she moved through the kitchen, measuring spices and stirring sauces, her thoughts grew disturbingly calm. This was not cruelty, she reasoned, but correction. Accidents happened. Bodies were fragile. Fate could be nudged without fingerprints. She believed she was restoring balance, removing a problem before it rooted itself too deeply. The idea settled comfortably in her mind. She felt justified, even righteous. By the time she set the table and called everyone to dinner, her smile was genuine. In her world, what she planned was not evil. It was necessary. And she never doubted herself, even for a moment. The kitchen hummed with the comforting rituals of Thanksgiving, every movement practiced, every surface spotless. The mother-in-law worked alone now, sleeves rolled neatly, hair pinned back, the radio murmuring softly in the background. Bowls of spices lined the counter, their familiar scents blending into something warm and nostalgic. Paprika, thyme, cinnamon, all measured with precision that spoke of years spent perfecting recipes passed down like heirlooms. She reached for a small, unmarked container tucked behind the flour canister, her hand steady, her breathing calm. The substance inside was finely ground, easily mistaken for seasoning, dissolving seamlessly into sauces and gravies. She sprinkled it carefully into a simmering dish, stirring slowly, methodically, ensuring it disappeared without trace. Steam rose, carrying a rich aroma that promised comfort and celebration. To anyone watching, it would have looked like devotion to tradition. She tasted the sauce, adjusted the seasoning, and nodded in satisfaction. There was no rush, no trembling, only the quiet certainty of someone who believed she was in control. She wiped the spoon clean, rinsed it thoroughly, and returned it to the drawer, every step intentional. The kitchen, once a place of family gatherings and shared memories, felt like a battlefield to her, though no weapons were visible. The stove became an altar of sorts, each dish a vessel for her plan. She moved with ritualistic care, aligning plates, polishing cutlery, checking temperatures, all while guarding her secret behind practiced hospitality. When she finally covered the dish and set it aside, a sense of finality settled over her. What was done could not be undone. She washed her hands, straightened her posture, and glanced at her reflection in the window, seeing only composure. Confident and unafraid, she believed the poison was invisible, the act untraceable, and the outcome inevitable, hidden perfectly in plain sight, waiting to be served with a smile. The dining room filled with the clatter of plates and the low murmur of conversation as everyone took their seats. Candlelight flickered across polished silverware, casting warm reflections that softened sharp edges and hid sharper intentions. The mother-in-law presided at the head of the table, smiling as she directed dishes to their places, commenting on recipes and memories with practiced ease. Compliments were offered, but each carried a subtle sting, jokes wrapped in politeness that landed just hard enough to remind everyone who held authority. Laughter followed, a little too loud, a little too quick. The pregnant wife sat quietly, hands folded near her plate, absorbing the rhythm of the room. The poisoned dish was set directly in front of her, steam rising invitingly. The mother-in-law insisted she try it first, praising its richness, her voice warm and encouraging. Several eyes turned toward her, waiting, watching. Her husband leaned over to answer a message on his phone, distracted by work, oblivious to the tension tightening around the table. Someone asked about baby names, another joked about sleepless nights ahead. The wife smiled, nodded, lifted her fork. Time seemed to slow as she took the first bite, the flavors deep and familiar, nothing immediately amiss. The mother-in-law watched closely, hiding her focus behind casual conversation. A comment about pregnancy cravings drew a few chuckles. The wife took another bite, then another, her movements measured, her expression serene. No one noticed the way her eyes briefly narrowed, or how she paused between breaths. Plates were passed, wine poured, stories retold. The ritual of Thanksgiving continued uninterrupted. To everyone else, it was just another family dinner, imperfect but ordinary. No alarms sounded, no suspicions rose. The poisoned dish sat half-finished before the wife, and the illusion of normalcy held strong, even as something irreversible began quietly unfolding beneath the surface. It started as a subtle shift, easy to miss beneath the warmth of the room and the heaviness of the meal. A faint dizziness brushed the edges of her awareness, followed by a tightening in her chest that felt out of place. She didn't react immediately. Panic would have drawn attention, and attention could be dangerous. Instead, she slowed her breathing, letting the sensation pass through her without resistance, measuring it carefully. Her pulse felt uneven, her fingertips tingled, and a mild nausea crept in far sooner than any ordinary discomfort should have. She glanced at her plate, then at her glass, noting what she had consumed and what she hadn't. Around her, conversation continued, laughter rising and falling, completely unaware. The mother-in-law was mid-sentence, gesturing animatedly, her face relaxed. The wife's mind shifted into a different gear, quiet and precise. She catalogued each symptom, their order, their intensity. This wasn't random. It followed a pattern she recognized, one she had studied in sterile rooms under fluorescent lights, long before this house or this family entered her life. Her training whispered possibilities, narrowing them quickly. She adjusted her posture, grounding her feet against the floor, steadying her core. A hand rested protectively on her belly, more from instinct than fear. She scanned the room subtly, noting who had eaten what, who showed no signs of distress. The realization settled heavily but clearly, this wasn't an accident or food poisoning. It was targeted. Her gaze flicked briefly to the mother-in-law, catching a flash of satisfaction that vanished almost instantly. The danger was real, deliberate, and unfolding inside her body. Still, she kept her expression neutral, her voice steady when she spoke. No one noticed the shift. But inside, she knew exactly what she was facing, and she knew this moment mattered more than anyone at the table could possibly imagine. As the symptoms settled into a familiar rhythm, memories surfaced with startling clarity. Training rooms replaced the dining room in her mind, stainless steel tables and controlled silence overlaying candlelight and chatter. She remembered instructors drilling patterns into them, warning that poison was rarely dramatic at first. It whispered before it screamed. She had learned to listen. She had spent years studying toxic compounds, their sources, their timelines. Covert operations demanded patience, observation, and restraint, skills honed in environments far more hostile than a holiday dinner. She had sat through simulations where lives depended on recognizing the smallest change in pulse or breath. What she felt now aligned too precisely to be coincidence. Pregnancy had not erased that training. If anything, it had refined it. Her instincts were sharper, her focus narrower, her tolerance for risk almost non-existent. Protecting another life had taught her to conserve energy, to calculate outcomes with ruthless clarity. She had stepped back from the field, yes, but she never stopped being who she was. A brief flash of another mission crossed her mind, a kitchen in another city, another woman who thought herself untouchable. The pattern had been the same then too. Confidence bred carelessness. The assumption that no one was watching. She returned fully to the present, her expression unchanged, her breathing controlled. Across the table sat someone who believed power came from dominance and secrecy. The irony was almost cruel. The predator thought she had cornered something fragile, something defenseless. In truth, she had chosen the wrong target. The woman she tried to poison had been trained to survive, to analyze, and to dismantle threats quietly and completely. The realization settled in the agent's mind with cold certainty. This wasn't just about endurance anymore. It was about exposure. And while the family saw a pregnant wife fighting discomfort, the real danger in the room was the one who had no idea she was already being studied. She let her shoulders slump slightly, allowed her hand to tremble just enough to be noticed. A shallow breath, a faint wince, carefully calibrated signs of decline. Experience told her that appearing weaker bought time, and time was survival. Inside, she slowed her heart rate deliberately, engaging techniques drilled into her through years of conditioning. Controlled breathing, muscle engagement, measured stillness. Panic would accelerate absorption. Calm could delay it. Her fingers brushed the inside of her coat pocket as she shifted in her chair, locating what she needed by touch alone. She had never stopped carrying safeguards, even after stepping back from active duty. With movements disguised as discomfort, she accessed a tiny emergency capsule, shielding it from view with her body and the tablecloth. She swallowed it with a sip of water, timing it so it looked like an attempt to ease nausea. The countermeasure began its quiet work. Her voice softened when she spoke, slightly unsteady, apologizing for not feeling well. She leaned subtly toward her husband, pressing her fingers into his wrist in a way that felt accidental but wasn't. A coded pressure, brief and specific. His brow furrowed, concern finally breaking through distraction. She caught his eyes and gave a small nod that meant more than reassurance. Across the table, the mother-in-law noticed the shift and felt a surge of satisfaction. She offered exaggerated concern, suggesting rest, waving off worries with practiced innocence. In her mind, the plan was unfolding exactly as intended. Weakness confirmed her assumptions. Control returned. The agent lowered her gaze, letting her eyelids flutter, masking clarity behind performance. Every second was calculated now. She monitored her body's response, adjusted her posture, conserved energy. The room buzzed with oblivious conversation, but the balance had already begun to shift. The mother-in-law smiled more openly, confidence blooming. She believed the outcome was inevitable. What she couldn't see was that the woman she thought was fading was already stabilizing, already signaling, already preparing to turn survival into something far more dangerous for the person who underestimated her. Even as she slouched slightly, feigning weakness, her mind worked with precision, mapping the room like a crime scene she already knew she would control. Every word spoken, every gesture made by the family, was catalogued in real time. Subtle tells, the way a hand lingered too long on a utensil, the slight twitch of a smile, the flicker of satisfaction in the mother-in-law's eyes, they all became pieces of a puzzle forming quietly beneath polite conversation. Her gaze drifted to the dishes she had eaten from, noting textures and portions. Using a small, almost imperceptible movement of her wrist, she collected a tiny sample from the edge of her plate, concealing it in a tissue she tucked into her lap. Each action appeared accidental, an afterthought born of her discomfort. Another hand, another tool, another bite, she repeated her subtle collection, ensuring enough evidence to prove intent and method, all while keeping her performance consistent. Audio cues mattered too. The mother-in-law's voice, slightly raised when she believed herself unobserved, the cadence of her instructions, even the way she chuckled at her own cleverness, it was all stored, every detail memorized. Every small detail of the environment was logged in her mind, from the positioning of cutlery to the lingering scent of the sauce she had poisoned. She tapped lightly against her glass, pretending to steady herself, but it was a subtle signal to her husband, who instinctively began recording small observations on his phone under the guise of taking pictures. Together, they were quietly building a file no one else would see until it was too late. The family continued eating, unaware they were now participants in a crime scene. Their gestures, words, and choices were being documented invisibly. Each action, each move, would later serve as indisputable proof. While the mother-in-law believed she had orchestrated the perfect plan, every detail she left behind was now a testament to her culpability, captured silently by the one she had tried to destroy. The sudden knock at the door made everyone startle. The mother-in-law glanced up from her seat, irritation flickering across her face, quickly masked by a polite smile. Moments later, uniformed figures entered, introducing themselves with calm efficiency. "We received a call regarding a possible medical emergency," one said, his voice firm yet controlled. The mother-in-law's eyes darted to the pregnant wife, confusion knitting her brow. Panic began to creep in, thin and insidious. The wife, seated with a slight slump only moments before, straightened imperceptibly, her spine aligning as if she had always intended to sit tall. The controlled tremor, the soft falter in her voice, all vanished. She met the agent's eyes with clarity, calm radiating from every line of her posture. The room shifted in tone instantly. Where uncertainty had ruled, authority now took command. "Please step aside," the agents instructed, moving with practiced precision. The mother-in-law stumbled slightly, searching for words, explanations, excuses, but none came. Confusion morphed into fear as the first rapid toxicology analysis was relayed, confirming what the agents already suspected. The evidence was immediate, undeniable, deliberate poisoning. Every gesture, every hidden action had been catalogued and verified in real time. The mother-in-law's carefully constructed confidence crumbled. Her lips parted, a feeble protest rising in her throat, but the wife raised a hand, and silence fell like a weight. The pregnant woman's composure was now unmistakable, the calm of someone who had long ago mastered survival under threat. Authority had shifted completely. Where once the mother-in-law had controlled the room, now she stood powerless, her dominance evaporating under the weight of truth. The wife, steady, unwavering, was no longer the target of a plot, she was the arbiter of justice. The house, once a stage for subterfuge and malice, became a theater of reckoning, and the predator finally realized she had underestimated the wrong person entirely. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the living room, a sharp punctuation against the polite murmur of Thanksgiving chatter. Neighbors who had been invited for pie and conversation now froze, their eyes widening as uniformed officers guided the mother-in-law to her feet. Her carefully curated composure fractured instantly, replaced by stammering, disbelief, and fleeting attempts at protest. "It's a misunderstanding," she cried, but the words rang hollow, brittle against the undeniable evidence laid bare before everyone. The officers presented the documentation, toxicology reports, recorded observations, and photographs from discreetly collected samples. Each piece of evidence tightened the narrative, weaving a story of deliberate intent too precise to argue against. Fingerprints, food traces, timestamps, all converged to confirm what had been quietly suspected by the one who had known all along: this was no accident. Neighbors murmured, glances exchanged with rising horror. Friends who had smiled and joked at family gatherings now turned to watch, witnessing a fall from grace that seemed almost cinematic in its immediacy. The mother-in-law's reputation, once polished with decades of social dominance and curated appearances, shattered in an instant. Her name, whispered with respect or envy, now carried only disbelief and condemnation. The son stood frozen, a mix of rage, shame, and incredulity washing over him. Every recollection of his mother's manipulations collided with the present, painting a portrait of deceit he had been blind to. His gaze shifted to his wife, who stood unwavering, steady in both body and mind. The realization struck him with force: the woman he had underestimated, dismissed at times as fragile and naive, had outmaneuvered a predator. Her strength was visible now, undeniable, commanding not just his respect but the admiration of all who witnessed the scene. As officers escorted the mother-in-law from the home, the room felt lighter, charged with truth and justice. The son's shock lingered, but it was tempered by a dawning understanding: the woman he married was far stronger than he, or anyone, had ever imagined. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media frenzy. The mother-in-law faced multiple charges: attempted murder, endangering a child, and the premeditated use of poison. Federal prosecutors presented the meticulously gathered evidence, each piece forming a case so airtight that defense strategies faltered before they could even be argued. Courtrooms filled with reporters, cameras, and neighbors, all eager to witness a scandal that had once seemed unimaginable. Headlines splashed across papers and websites alike: Thanksgiving poison plot foiled by pregnant FBI agent and mother-in-law arrested after attempted murder at family dinner. Inside the courtroom, the pregnant wife remained composed, her calm a stark contrast to the chaos around her. Every glance from the mother-in-law was met with unwavering poise, her presence commanding respect and attention. Federal authorities ensured maximum protection for her and her unborn child, monitoring interactions, controlling access, and maintaining strict security measures. The meticulousness of the operation mirrored the precision she had displayed during the initial crisis, a reminder that her training extended far beyond immediate danger. Her husband struggled with a tangle of emotions. Guilt gnawed at him for not noticing the danger sooner, for his distracted behavior that had allowed the situation to escalate. Loyalty wrestled with shock as he confronted the truth about his mother's malice. Amid the turmoil, clarity began to emerge. He realized the depth of his wife's strength and the gravity of the betrayal they had both endured. Justice moved forward methodically, consequences unfolding in real time. The mother-in-law's freedom and reputation dissolved, replaced with a narrative of accountability and exposure. Meanwhile, the agent and her husband began to rebuild trust and safety, their family fortified not just by the law, but by the resilience and foresight that had turned a near tragedy into a testament to vigilance, courage, and unwavering determination. In the quiet that followed the storm, she finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what had passed and the relief of survival. The adrenaline that had carried her through danger ebbed slowly, leaving space for reflection. She thought of her unborn child, safe and thriving, a living testament to both vulnerability and resilience. Pregnancy had not been a burden, it had been a catalyst, sharpening instincts she had once relied on in the field and teaching her new ways to protect, observe, and endure. She considered the many ways strength had been misjudged. To the world, strength often looked like dominance, aggression, or control. But she now understood that true power could be quiet, calculated, and unwavering even in the face of imminent threat. Survival required patience, composure, and the ability to turn perceived weakness into advantage. The experience had transformed her perspective on motherhood and herself. Neither were passive states, but active roles requiring courage, foresight, and discipline. Memories of fear lingered, but they no longer defined her. Every glance, every movement, every breath was a reminder of the agency she possessed, of the life she had preserved and the justice she had ensured. She realized that her strength was not just protective, it was generative, shaping the environment around her and ensuring the safety and dignity of those she loved. In that moment, she redefined what it meant to be strong, vigilant, resilient, and unflinchingly capable, a mother whose power was both quiet and absolute. 1 year later, the house was filled with a calm warmth, far removed from the chaos of the previous Thanksgiving. The child, healthy and bright-eyed, slept peacefully in the nursery while laughter echoed softly from the kitchen. The past, the fear, the betrayal, the poison, no longer held power over them. Every decoration, every meal prepared, felt intentional, honest, and safe. Justice had been served, and resilience had prevailed. The wife, now a mother, looked around with quiet satisfaction, knowing control had finally returned to the right hands. Thanksgiving had been reclaimed, not as a day of fear, but as a celebration of survival and triumph. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth.